I never imagined the basement, the place I feared most as a child, would become my prison. It was always a place of shadows and whispers, where the damp air clung to your skin and the floor smelled of rust and mold. The cracked concrete, the cobwebs draping across corners, and the steady dripping of water from some unseen pipe made it feel less like part of a home and more like a dungeon. My father knew how much I hated it, which is why he chose it as his weapon. That night when he grabbed my wrist so tightly it left bruises and dragged me down those narrow creaking stairs, I realized this wasn't about punishment, it was about power. He wanted me silent, obedient, erased. With a shove he threw me into the dark, slammed the heavy wooden door, and the lock clicked with a finality that echoed inside my chest. "Let's see how strong you really are," he muttered from the other side, his voice dripping with mockery, and then I was alone. At first, I told myself it would only be for a few hours, maybe overnight, just enough to teach me a lesson. I tried to steady my breathing, tried not to panic, but the silence was crushing. Minutes blurred into hours, and hours into something longer. The darkness pressed against me like a living thing, and the only sounds were the faint scurry of rats in the corners and my own uneven breaths. I called out for my mother, but there was no reply. She had never intervened before, why would she now? To her, I had always been the disappointment, the child who couldn't meet expectations, the burden. My brother's laughter from upstairs drifted faintly through the floorboards, mocking me. He was probably sitting comfortably, controller in hand, while I sat on cold cement, locked away like garbage. That was when the truth hit me, I wasn't being punished. I was being broken. The first day passed without food or water. My stomach twisted painfully, my throat grew dry, and my lips began to crack. I pressed my ear against the door, listening to the muffled footsteps above, hoping for some sign of compassion, some indication that they would let me out. But no one came. By the second day, my head pounded from dehydration, my body weak and trembling. Yet something strange began to happen inside me. The pain stopped being just pain, it became fire. My father thought starvation and silence would crush me, but with each insult I remembered, with each cruel word echoing in my head, "You're weak. You're worthless. You'll never be more than a shadow," I felt something hardening within me. I whispered to myself in the dark, barely audible at first, but growing stronger with every repetition, "I am not weak. I am not broken. I will get out. And when I do, he will regret this." By the third night, delirium wrapped around me. My body shook from hunger, but in my mind, I saw visions of myself walking out of the basement, standing tall, my father's smug grin wiped away, his eyes wide with fear. The image was so vivid I almost smiled. Even the rats that crept closer to me no longer terrified me. I was past fear. My father thought he was stripping me down to nothing, but what he was really doing was carving out a storm inside me, piece by piece, hunger by hunger, insult by insult. By the fourth day, I began to change. My movements grew slower, deliberate, but my thoughts sharpened. The darkness became my companion, no longer suffocating but teaching me. I listened closely, the way the door rattled slightly when someone upstairs slammed another door, the faint cracks in the wooden beams that supported the ceiling, the tiny draft of air that slipped through a corner, whispering that there was still a world beyond these walls. My father thought the basement was his weapon, but in reality, it was becoming mine. It was where the old version of me, the obedient, timid child, was being buried, and something new was being born. By the fifth day, I was no longer begging for rescue. I no longer called for my mother. I no longer cared if they remembered me. I realized I didn't need them, I needed only myself. The diary of my hunger became my resolve, the thirst cutting my throat became a vow etched into my soul. I promised myself that when the door opened, I wouldn't crawl out, I wouldn't bow, I wouldn't say thank you. I would rise, and they would see what they had created. My father believed he was the unbreakable one, the tyrant of the house, but he didn't realize that locking me away wasn't breaking me, it was forging me. On the sixth day, weakness threatened to drown me, but rage kept me alive. My body was frail, but my spirit blazed. I thought of all the years he had belittled me, the times my mother turned her face away, the smug look on my brother's face whenever I cried. I replayed those moments again and again until I felt nothing but clarity. I knew exactly who they were, and I knew exactly who I would become. They weren't my family, they were my captors. And captors always make one mistake, they underestimate the prisoner. Finally, on the 7th day, the lock turned. The door creaked open, and a rectangle of light sliced into the dark. My father stood there, expecting to see a broken version of me, a desperate child crawling toward him, begging for forgiveness, for water, for mercy. Instead, I stood slowly, my back straighter than it had ever been, my eyes burning with something he couldn't name. His smirk faltered. For the first time, he hesitated. And in that hesitation, I saw it, the crack in his armor, the flicker of doubt. He had no idea what I had become. He had thrown me into the dark to kill my spirit, but he had only set it on fire. I walked past him without a word, each step echoing like a declaration. He tried to grab my arm again, but this time I pulled away with such force that he stumbled. His shock was almost satisfying, but not nearly enough. This wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. Because now I knew something he didn't. He hadn't locked me in a basement, he had locked himself into a war he could never win. I was no longer his child, his victim, his shadow. I was his reckoning. And as I climbed those stairs, leaving the basement behind, I made a silent promise to myself. He thought the basement would break me in a week, but it hadn't. Instead, it had broken him without him even realizing it. Because the girl who walked out of that darkness was not the same one he had thrown in. And when the storm I carried inside finally unleashed, he would be the first to feel it.